Hello guys and girls, and welcome to today's lesson. As you can see, we are going to be taking some notes today, and this is something that I like to do pretty often in my classroom. Instead of me standing up in front of the room and us all taking the notes together at the same time, I like to use a video to take notes. I know we all write at different paces, we all learn at different paces, so I think videos just give us the opportunity to all work at a speed that we are comfortable with. And if you're a faster writer or if you're a slower writer, this allows you to work in a way that is best for you. So just like if we were taking notes together in class, you are expected to write these notes down. So hopefully you already have your note-taking sheet glued into your notebook. You have a pencil ready to go, and if you do have those things, we're going to go ahead and get started. Our topic today is something that I'm hoping you have at least heard at some point before, but if you haven't, that's okay too. We're going to be learning about it today, and that is the ABEE writing strategy, or some people call this ABEE squared. ABEE. This is actually an acronym. An acronym is when you have letters together, but each letter represents a word. So like, for example, NFL, if you're a football person, is an acronym for National Football League. So ABEE is also an acronym, and the first thing we're going to talk about is what ABEE stands for. Now, you're going to notice that several things here on the screen are highlighted in yellow. That is a clue that if you see something highlighted in yellow, you should be filling something in on your note-taking sheet. So keep that in mind as you are following along today. Also, should add that you can always pause this video, you can rewind this video, rewatch things. So if you need extra time to write things down, or if you need to rewatch something, of course, you have that option. All right, so like I said, ABEE is an acronym, and here's what it stands for. The A stands for answer the question. So notice the word answer starts with the letter A, so the A in ABEE stands for answer. The B stands for construct a because answer, so B stands for because. E1, use evidence from the text to support your answer. E2, explain how your citation supports your answer. And if you're confused, E1, E2, that's something that we're going to be talking about more. It's something that we use when we really dive into on-demands and what those should look like. You're going to get used to hearing E1 and E2. But for now, I want you to remember that E1 stands for evidence and E2 stands for explain. Then you have another E1 and E2, so another evidence and another explain. And then ABEE ends with a concluding sentence where you write one sentence to wrap up your thoughts and end your paragraph. So we would be using the ABEE writing strategy if we were asked to write a short answer or an extended response style question. This is the format that I'm going to be expecting you to use this year. So before we move any further, we are going to talk about an example. We're going to look at an example of an ABEE extended response question. And I thought we would use a classic story of Little Red Riding Hood to help us walk through this process and to see what all the parts of ABEE look like and what they stand for. But in case you need a really quick refresher, we're actually going to read the story together. So please follow along as I'm reading the story that's on your screen. Once upon a time, there was a little girl who lived in a village near the forest. Whenever she went out, the little girl wore a red riding cloak, so everyone in the village called her Little Red Riding Hood. One morning, Little Red Riding Hood asked her mother if she could go to visit her grandmother, as it had been a while since they'd seen each other. That's a good idea, her mother said. So they packed a nice basket for Little Red Riding Hood to take to her grandmother. When the basket was ready, the little girl put on her red cloak and kissed her mother goodbye. Remember, go straight to Grandma's house, her mother cautioned. Don't dawdle along the way, and please don't talk to strangers. The woods are dangerous. Don't worry, Mommy, said Little Red Riding Hood. I'll be careful. But when Little Red Riding Hood noticed some lovely flowers in the wood, she forgot her promise to her mother. She picked a few, watched the butterflies flit about for a while, listened to the frogs croaking, and then picked a few more. Little Red Riding Hood was enjoying the warm summer day so much that she didn't notice a dark shadow approaching out of the forest behind her. Suddenly, the wolf appeared beside her. "What are you doing out here, little girl?" the wolf asked in a voice as friendly as he could muster. "I'm on my way to see my grandma, who lives through the forest near the brook," Little Red Riding Hood replied. Then she realized how late she was and quickly excused herself, rushing down the path to her grandma's house. The wolf, in the meantime, took a shortcut. The wolf, a little out of breath from running, arrived at Grandma's and knocked lightly at the door. "Oh, thank goodness, dear. Come in, come in. I was worried sick that something had happened to you in the forest," said Grandma, thinking that the knock was her granddaughter. The wolf let himself in. Poor Granny did not have time to say another word before the wolf gobbled her up. The wolf let out a satisfied burp and then poked through Granny's wardrobe to find a nightgown that he liked. He added a frilly sleeping cap for good measure, dabbed some of Granny's perfume behind his pointy ears. A few minutes later, Red Riding Hood knocked on the door. The wolf jumped into bed and pulled the covers over his nose. "Who is it?" he called in a cackly voice. "It's me, Little Red Riding Hood." "Oh, how lovely. Do come in, my dear," croaked the wolf. When Little Red Riding Hood entered the little cottage, she could scarcely recognize her grandmother. "Grandmother, your voice sounds so odd. Is something the matter?" she asked. "Oh, I just have a touch of a cold," squeaked the wolf, adding a cough at the end to prove the point. "But Grandmother, what big ears you have," said Little Red Riding Hood as she edged closer to the bed. "The better to hear you with, my dear," replied the wolf. "But Grandmother, what big eyes you have," said Little Red Riding Hood. "The better to see you with, my dear," replied the wolf. "But Grandmother, what big teeth you have," said Little Red Riding Hood, her voice quivering slightly. "The better to eat you with, my dear," roared the wolf, and he leapt out of bed and began to chase the little girl. Almost too late, Little Red Riding Hood realized that the person in the bed was not her grandmother, but a hungry wolf. She ran across the room and through the door shouting, "Help, wolf!" as loudly as she could. A woodsman who was chopping logs nearby heard her cry and ran towards the cottage as fast as he could. He grabbed the wolf and made him spit out the poor grandmother, who was a bit frazzled by the whole experience, but still in one piece. "Oh, Grandma, I was so scared," sobbed Little Red Riding Hood. "I'll never speak to strangers or dawdle in the forest again." "There, there, child, you've learned an important lesson. Thank goodness you shouted loud enough for the kind woodsman to hear you." The woodsman knocked out the wolf and carried him deep into the forest where he wouldn't bother people any longer. Little Red Riding Hood and her grandmother had a nice lunch and a long chat. All right, now that you've had a really good refresher over the story of Little Red Riding Hood, we are going to pretend like you have been given a writing question and you have been asked to respond to that question based on what you just read in the story. So it says, describe the actions the wolf took to fool Red Riding Hood. Use examples from the text to support your answer. One thing that I want to point out here is that this is not an on-demand question, so this is not like the pretest we just took. You're not expected to write 5 paragraphs. Instead, you would use the ABEE writing strategy when you are given an extended response question like the one we have here. So let's walk through the steps that you took some notes on earlier, and let's look at what that might look like for the story in that question that we were just asked. Remember, step 1 is to restate and answer the question. Once again, that question was, describe the actions the wolf took to fool Red Riding Hood. Use examples from the text to support your answer. So when we are restating and answering, all we're doing is taking the question and we are making it part of our answer in a complete sentence. So it might look something like this. The wolf fooled Little Red Riding Hood by pretending to be Red's grandmother. We saw that in the story. We saw some of the different things that the wolf did to try to pretend to be her grandmother. But all we have to do, the first step, is to just restate and answer the question. So why do we need to restate the question to begin with? It's really important to make sure we restate the question because it helps us keep our answers focused on what is being asked. It's also important to avoid using vague pronouns. If you don't know what a vague pronoun is, you can look over here at the side of the screen. These are some pronouns that we do not want to see in our answers. It, they, you, he, she, we. We want to make sure that when we are writing our answers, we are being very specific. So for example, instead of saying he tried to pretend to be her to fool the girl, we would want to make sure we use specific characters' names, like the wolf pretended to be the grandmother to try to fool Little Red Riding Hood. Another thing that we want to make sure we avoid when we are using the ABEE written response is saying things like, I think, I feel, I believe. So we wouldn't want to start our answer by saying something like, I think the wolf pretended to be the grandmother to fool Little Red Riding Hood. We want to make sure we avoid saying, I think, I feel, I believe. All right, so step 1 is done. We have answered the question. Step number 2 is where we construct a because answer. So remember, the second letter of ABE is that B, and the B stands for because. So what is a because answer? This is where you give like a general answer. You're not going into a lot of detail. You're just giving a very short explanation for why your answer is correct. It's very, very basic. So in the question we were just talking about, describe the actions the wolf took to fool Red Riding Hood. That might look something like this. Remember, we already said the wolf fooled Little Red Riding Hood by pretending to be Red's grandmother. Now we're going to give our because answer. And I do want to see the word because in the answer when you are using the ABE writing strategy. So it's going to look something like this. He did this because he wanted Red to feel comfortable when she visited so he could eat her just like he ate her grandmother. So again, we restated and answered, and then we came up with our because answer. Why do we write a because answer? Just like with restating it helps us keep focused on what we are writing about. It gives our reader an overview of what we're about to say, and it also lets our reader know what we're going to be writing about. Okay? Make sure you have those notes copied down, and remember you can pause the video if you need to. We have restated and answered. We have given our because answer, and that's going to take us to our first E1. Remember, E1 means evidence. So this is the part in your answer where you're going to have to go back to the text and you're going to have to pull out some evidence that supports your answer. So again, we have that same question. Describe the actions that the wolf took to fool Red Riding Hood. And now we're going to get some evidence from the text. So if you look at what's highlighted, this is evidence. This is a sentence that I literally pulled from the text. And I was looking for something from the text that showed a place where the wolf was pretending to be her grandmother, because remember, that was part of our answer. So I put according to the text, and then I have quotation marks, and those are there to show that this is not my words, this is the author's words. Here's my quote. The wolf then poked through Granny's wardrobe to find a nightgown that he liked. He also added a frilly sleeping cap for good measure, dabbled some of Granny's perfume behind his pointy ears, and then I have quotation marks at the end of that quote. Now, if you look down here, it says this quote is directly from the text. So again, this evidence is not coming from our brain. It is coming straight from the text. And we put quotation marks around it to show that this is not our words, this is the author's words. So why do we need to have supporting evidence? We do this because it gives the reader specific examples that will help them understand what we're writing about. And again, I cannot say this enough, your evidence needs to be cited directly from the text. So for that E1, for your evidence, you go back to the text, you find a piece of evidence, and you quote it directly from the text.